Welcome to another episode of Botox and Burpees. I'm here with my ever-present podcast guest star, Sasha Rhee. Welcome back, Sasha.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yes, today we're going to talk about something that's a little different, probably a little more personalized. It's about the Korean language and growing up in America and, dealing with learning the Korean language or not learning the Korean language, as the case may be, and sort of how our experiences are with that. I am someone who was born in the United States, but my parents moved to the United States from South Korea about a year or two before I was born. You obviously were born to two parents who grew up in the United States, me and Susan. So obviously our perspectives on this are a little bit different. So to start off, let's talk about your knowledge of the Korean language. And how good are you in terms, or comfortable are you about speaking Korean?
So everyone that I meet who's like yours, like you, like the child of Korean immigrants, like all my friends at like Duke who are like that generation, they all say the same phrase, which is like you're really good at Korean for like a third generation kid, which
So most of them have parents that,
who immigrated from Korea. So
okay,
they're like you.
okay,
Because I guess the way it works is like first generation is you're the first generation to live in America,
okay.
and then second and then third. So I'm
S-
third.
So I'm second, and
Yeah.
so they're telling you for third generation, you're pretty good at Korean.
Yeah, like some of them are really surprised because I happen to know like a lot of slang. I know a lot. I like I'm up to date with like the comment like the commoner Korean, like just how people speak usually. But in terms of like my actual speaking abilities, I can read and write fluently, which a lot of people are surprised by because usually it's the reverse when it comes to people learning a language. And then my understanding is not bad and my speaking is not good. My grammar is like horrible.
So what do you mean by what level is it? Like, are you at a
I would say in terms of reading and writing, I'm fluent.
like a third grade level, at a fifth grade, like a high
For
school
reading and
level?
writing,
Yeah.
that's like I can okay, my writing is like at a high school, like middle school level.
Oh, get out.
My writing's really good, and then
Okay.
my reading is like perfect. I can read for as long as you need me to.
Okay.
So my reading, I promise you, I'm very literate. Like I could read for days and days and days because how many combinations are there?
All right. I'm pulling out a Korean text on like philosophy, like
Yeah,
existential
totally.
philosophy.
I will not understand what I'm reading, but I could read it for days.
Okay. And then you're
My comprehension is like advanced elementary, like middle at school, I want to say, and then my speaking is like a kindergartner, which is when I stopped Korean school. So.
mm, okay. What kind of slang words do you use all the time in Korean?
Well, I don't use them, but I know them. Like, for instance, like in Korea, they really like iced Americanos. It's like no matter the season. And so they call it like like iced Amer like the first syllable of each one. That, like, there's like 대박, which means like awesome, like 헐, which means like whoa, like
And where'd you learn all of this slangy Korean?
from K-pop.
Okay. So did you learn all of your Korean from K-pop?
So obviously you know this, but so like my maternal grandmother, like raised like didn't raise me, but she was around the house a lot because both my parents worked when I was younger and like my mom would travel, and my dad obviously go to the office. So I first picked up Korean from her. Like mom has like anecdotes in that journal that you guys wrote when I was like 2 saying like I think Sasha's confusing Korean and English because I think she's speaking a little bit of Korean at like preschool and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I first picked it up through grandma,
Mm-hmm.
and then you guys sent me to Korean school for like 5 years. So I did Korean school.
And that was from when to when? Like what grades?
I studied at the same kindergarten level the entire time. I think it was like 5 to 10, I want to say, like
Okay.
4 to 8, maybe, like
Yeah.
4 to 9.
Yeah.
So I did Korean school for a while, and that's what taught me to read and write. And then I like stopped Korean school, and then I got into K-pop around like 12, 13, like I want to say 13. And then that also like watching YouTube videos of my favorite Korean artists, like that also then kind of like kept me up to date with like helped me practice a little bit.
Why do you care about learning Korean?
Well, K-pop wasn't because I cared about learning Korean. K-pop was because like I enjoyed it a lot, and it just happens that they're young and they use slang and you pick up on it.
Yeah.
I think for me, like learning it when I was younger it was not on my mind. Like we just were forced to go to Korean school basically, and Nick and I particularly did not enjoy it if we're being honest.
Mm-hmm.
I think now I've kind of given up on learning it honestly fully and ever becoming fluent and like advancing my level, but I don't know, some part of me because it's like my background and like I at least know some of it, I want to like at least maintain that. Like I don't want to forget it
Why?
because it's part of my heritage. I feel like being Korean is very important to me.
It is?
Yes.
Why?
I'm very proud to be a Korean.
Really?
Yeah. I find a lot of pride in it. Like, I don't know if it's because, like, my grandparents immigrated from Korea or just, like, when we went, I had, like, such an amazing time, and I feel like I thought honestly we weren't that Korean, which is, like, because 'cause we're very American, but then when we went to Korea and we went into that little museum I don't know if you remember, we went to, like, a little museum that, like, went through the life cycle of, like, a Korean person from, like, the first birthday all the way to, like, the traditions you do when someone dies or whatever. I, like, realized we, like, did more than I thought, and, like, the way we operate in our lives is more Korean than I thought.
Like what?
Well, one, like, I just I don't know, like, I forgot we had, like, a first birthday and all that,
Oh, yeah.
we did bowing for so long on New Year's, and we eat, like, rice cake soup, like, whatever, like, things like that where I was like, "Oh, like, we still do a lot of things for the fact that I'm 2 generations now removed from the people that lived in Korea."
Mm.
So I feel like being Korean is very important to me. I just think it's also important to have pride in your culture, and I feel like Korea's grown so much and evolved, and, like, there are obviously downsides to it, but I feel like neglecting that is, like, there's no point.
Are most of your friends Korean?
I do close to my friends, like, I have definitely more Korean friends than anyone else, but I still have, like, a diverse group, but there is that cultural connection still with my Korean friends.
Mm. Are there any downsides to being a Korean American?
I think one of the downsides of my being my generation, 3rd generation, is the language, like,
Like how?
just that the priority or I guess the way I was raised, like, cause mom is fluent in Korean because, like, grandma literally does not speak any English. Like, I guess, like, for me, the difference which I see kind of as a downside is that, like, the language has somewhat not faded, but, like, isn't like, Nick and I are not as fluent, but we can obviously learn on our own, but I think it's, like, that type of aspect is different.
I think you have a different perspective. First of all, my 2 brothers
Yeah,
are way worse at Korean than you are,
mhm,
and my mother spoke 99% Korean.
mhm.
I think a lot of it was conscious or maybe not conscious, but it was deliberate on my part not to lean in on being Korean or growing up Korean or leaning into Korean culture or the Korean language for a bunch of reasons. And those reasons seem to be different than your reasons about wanting to be very proud about, having a Korean culture and a Korean background. Uh, does any of that really help you in life?
I mean, I don't think, like, I wanna be proud to be like, I'm proud to be a Korean because, like, it will somehow help me in life. It's not I feel like it's, like, not something that gives me, like, extrinsic value of, like, this is going to, like, give me more money or help me succeed more or whatever.
Mhm.
It's just, like, something that I feel like is intrinsic to your identity.
Mhm.
It's intrinsic to who at least I am,
Mm.
and I have I feel like Korean culture has led me to so many great communities and, like, friendships and relationships in my life.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm also biased because like, I did a Korea Finance Society fellowship, for instance, which builds on that intrinsic value of, like, being Korean, and I
Mm.
guess there is some extrinsic value to that,
Mm.
but I really think, like, it's nothing about advancing or leading to other results. It's more of an intrinsic thing.
Wouldn't it just be more useful to learn Spanish or another language other than leaning into Korean, honestly?
I mean, my Spanish is better than my Korean in
Okay.
terms of, um, comprehension.
Vocabulary.
Yeah. Like, I took Spanish for a really, really long time. I
Mm.
mean, like, Duke offers Korean, and I took Spanish.
Wasn't it good that I forced you to take Spanish instead of Latin when you had a language choice early on in your academic career?
Yes, but I also think making the direct comparison between Korean and Spanish is very different.
How so?
Well, at least from my perspective, because, like, I am Korean, and in my everyday life currently, maybe not in my professional life later on, but in my everyday life currently, if I was more fluent in Korean, that would just, like, advance a lot of parts of my life, like, whether it's, like, my relationship with, like, grandma or, like, things like that, or, like, my own personal, like, perception of myself and me being Korean.
One of the things that Korean culture does or is leans into pretty heavily are gender differences, misogyny. There's a lot of misogyny in the Korean culture. So why would you even lean into learning the Korean culture or being part of it when they literally treat women so much worse than men?
I think there's, like, a tension between it because, like I said, like, intrinsically, we are still our roots are still in Korea, and, like, I am a Korean person, not because of, like, choice, but because, like, that is the ethnicity that I was born with. Obviously, Korea is an extremely patriarchal country. I've done a lot of research on this. I've written a lot of papers about this. Like, I've read a lot of books about this, about how Korea, for instance, has like the number one gender pay gap in the world. But I think then that's where it adds to my nuance of I'm not just like blindly like, wow, like I want to like maybe when I was younger and more naive, but now I like, appreciate the nuance of being a Korean American more because of like being American makes me cognizant of like, my Korean heritage. Like, living in America makes you cognizant of, like, certain things in Korea, like you said, like the patriarchy, where there is, like, that tension in, like, America, let's, like, has, like, a better, um, like, pay gap, for instance, or, like, things like that. Like, I feel like it's not like me wanting to learn Korean is like, I wanna live in Korea someday, like, I want to, like, become a full you know what I mean, like, a Korean citizen and all that. It's more just, like, adding, I think, to, like, what it means to me to be Korean American, and it's, like, a different they both kind of work in tandem.
I would say someone would argue that you're kind of whitewashing the Korean culture that way. You're picking and choosing the aspects that you like, but you're not actually sort of being honest in terms of the fact that there's so much about the Korean culture which is very negative and can be very difficult to deal with. The language dictates how you think. And the language itself, when you look at how they speak about men and women, like the terms men and women or husband and wife are literally different. Like the literal translation of husband is like outside person, and the translation for wife is like inside person. Like woman is not supposed to be out. Like they're supposed to be cloistered inside the house doing housework. Men are the ones, literally by the language definition, are the ones who are out doing things. So it's that kind of issue in the language that dictates how people think in that culture. And that culture, you can't separate and like say, oh, I like this part of, I like the kimchi, but I don't like the bulgogi of the Korean language or the Korean culture. And so I'm just going to pick and choose this, that, but not like really acknowledge this part. Like that is really where I think people could argue that you're just kind of a dilettante when it comes to like picking out what is Korean to you.
Well, one, I don't appreciate that, but I honestly think, like, I don't really know what solution you're trying to get at to, like, respond to this type of argument, like, what so then, like, what I should do instead is just lean into fully being American, and because Korean language, for instance, is like that, like, I shouldn't try to learn it, or I shouldn't try to, like, continue to advance my skills with that. Like, there are a lot of things where like, we live in America.
Yeah.
We contribute to capitalism, for instance,
Of
quiet
course.
working, things like that.
Yeah.
People can make the argument that that's a horrible system, you know, that there's a lot of inequity that you by being upon you mean by contributing and not like whatever, like part of it is just acknowledgement instead of just refusing or turning away, I feel like from the entire concept in of itself. Like I feel like being aware one of like I talk all the time to my friends about like the patriarchal standards of Korea. Like if you're Korean, you know how horrible Korea is to women. You can't like not know unless like you are misogynistic. But just because I feel like it's better for me to be aware and acknowledge it and like be understanding of that than rather just like ignore being Korean and pretend like I'm not like I don't know what the solution would be then to that. Pretend that I'm not Korean, turn away, be like I'm not learning this language because of that. Like some people might respond that way, but personally, I don't see that and I get called whitewashed all the time. And genuinely, like I think that like, sometimes I am, like, you can admit that, but it's not something that I necessarily, like, chose. A lot of the factors that have contributed to it are how I was raised, how you know what I mean? Like, where I was raised, what location, like, even the town in Jersey that we live in versus, like, Fort Lee is very different, and so, like, I think that these are all things that for me to turn away and completely be like, "Well, I'm just gonna not be Korean then," and, like, you know, not advance my language skills and not care about learning the language, I feel like that's not even doing anything better.
I don't think you have to make a conscious choice to turn away, but the issue is that you were raised not Korean on so many levels. And to me, having seen what it means to grow up Korean, people don't understand how limiting that is as a child when the system is set up that you must have absolute obedience to your parents. There's no free will or choice for kids. Like, if you see very traditional Korean parents, they will dictate everything that you do, all of your study, where you go, what you do. You can't literally do anything without the dictates of your parents. I remember my parents, when my mother and father got married, she had to live at my father's parents' house, even though my father he immigrated to the United States. But because she was now property, essentially property, and quote, no longer part of her family, but now part of her husband's family, she had to go and live with my father's parents, serve them, clean for them, cook for them, do all that stuff, because that is the way the Korean culture works. And she had no choice. So many of the choices I made, either consciously or unconsciously, in terms of growing up, in terms of raising you guys, was not to be part of that. I really wanted to give you guys choices in terms of growing up. That's American. That is uniquely American in most cultures. Like, I don't think there are a lot of cultures that I see on the immigrant side where you can allow your children that freedom to grow, to be happy, to follow what they want to do. And so when I see a lot of people who are like nostalgic for the old country, or this is the way it used to be for people, it was better, I don't find that the case at all. I'm not saying turn away from Korea or Korean culture, but I don't think people really understand what it means to be Korean. To be Korean is so restrictive. That society is tight and you don't have a lot of freedom. And so you have that luxury of looking at it from an outside perspective, of being someone who could make that choice of whether you wanted to or not. I have friends who were forced to go to Korea and learn, and they couldn't do sports. They couldn't do anything else. They had to go learn Korean, go back to Korea, study engineering, whatever it was, because that was the Korean way. And so it is one thing to look out from the outside and say, "Oh, this is nice." Um, it's another thing to have to be forced to be in that system.
Well, for one, for you to say that I'm like a blind outside looking, like I'm gonna be so real. You cannot like I am not like nostalgic for the old country. I do not want to live, you know what I mean? Like I don't like me saying that I am Korean is a fact. In terms of like my ethnicity is me being Korean.
Sure, just like you're a woman
Yeah, like me, like and an American. Like
and
these
with black
yeah.
hair.
Yeah, it's like that's my nationality. Like these are just like like whatever, like facts about like who I am and like where I came from and like things that like I was born like, like with two people with Korean heritage and that's not something like I necessarily chose. That doesn't necessarily mean that I like when I say like I am Korean and like I want to learn the language, that does not at all imply that like I necessarily want to like go back to the olden days, which I don't even know what that means, like pre-war, post-war. Like I don't want to like that doesn't mean I want to go back to it. I feel like that is one of like the tensions of being like Korean American is acknowledging, obviously, like I said, like how horrible Korea treats women, like, still today in the working place, like, the sacrifices of motherhood in a career and things like that. But just me saying, like, me wanting to learn the language does not necessarily mean that I want to, like, continue to perpetuate what, like, a lot of the stereotypes that Korea has continued to put through. I am not saying that I wish I was born in Korea or that I wish,
Oh, I'm
my
not
mom
saying that.
yeah, and I like that those are all things where it's like like people that say sometimes people say I'm Korean not because like that doesn't necessarily mean they're nostalgic for it. I feel like it's different when I see people, which I've heard a lot of people who are not Korean, not of Korean ethnicity, have no familial or no relations at all to the country, and they're the ones who are like, "Oh, well, Korea is so amazing. Like Korea is like the perfect country and things like that." That's very different, I feel like. But I feel like a lot of Korean Americans do feel that tension and like yes, like being raised in America allows you access to so many opportunities. Like the American culture is much more forgiving, like you said, of people pursuing their passions and grades not being everything and not making you go to like after school, for instance, and study till like 9 p.m. Like those are a lot of things. But I think simultaneously, there is still the feeling of some Korean Americans where it's like, but it is difficult when you're not able to communicate with your grandparents, for instance. Like things like that, I think, which are like nuanced tensions that just saying like, saying I'm proud to be Korean is not necessarily, like, erase all of that either. Like, it's hard to acknowledge, I feel like, everything in one statement, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not going to be proud to be Korean in my own right and how I was raised in that mix of cultures.
I think being in that mix is what makes it much better. That's the thing. Like, leaning into the Korean side, I sing even your generation, kids who or their families who are Korean American, they live in the United States, they are US citizens, but they self-isolate into Korean communities, just like the Fort Lees or the Palisades Parks, or where they're not really engaging on the American culture side, but it's almost as if they're still living in Seoul. And those are the people that I look at and I have real difficulty with in terms of, oh yeah, Korea's so great, you rah rah Korea, I'm leaning into Korean everything. Those are the people I think that are really not understanding what it means to be Korean American. And for me, yes, those are people who would look at me and say, this guy is not Korean, not even a little bit. But on that side, as you said, I'm actually more Korean than most people think. I just don't sit there and make that my life or the way I feel like I should be living my life. I think that this is where I don't love people who look down on other Korean Americans for being too, quote, white or not Korean enough. And so there's a very slippery slope where I see a lot of people who judge other Korean Americans because of their lack of Koreanness. And I would actually criticize them for leaning a little bit too much on the Korean culture side and saying, hey, listen, you guys really need to understand the, quote, like you said, tensions that are involved and maybe sort of recalibrate a little bit.
I mean, I also will say, like, I've literally heard for my, like, almost 20 years of life, like, you could not, like, literally, I think every single year of my life, I've heard, like, "You are not Korean enough," like, "You're super white," like, all these statements, like, I've heard 1,000 times, still in college. They don't bother me, though, because I acknowledge that, like, my connection to the Korean culture is probably a lot weaker and a lot different than, like, these people who I feel like these families you're talking about, they're kinda like how you're like, the same generation of your family, like, the parents are Korean immigrants, and the kids who are, like, my age now are like you, where they're, like, kind of navigating they were born in America, but their parents were not. Like, I obviously do think that it's very like, how we view them is probably, like, very different from how they view us, and, there is some bias in the sense that what they did is different from the choice that you made, and so people just make different choices in how they wanna raise their kids in America, and how they wanna live in America, and how they wanna navigate America itself. But I mean, like, you bring up a point where it's like, if you really wanted to be that Korean, then just stay in Korea. But again, they also have a lot of nuanced tensions where it's like, well, financially, it might be, better in, um, America, for instance. Maybe they don't wanna go to the army. Like, there are still nuanced tensions on both sides, I think.
I think the issue is that these are people who want to take advantage of a lot of American benefits. Like the Korean education system is super rigid, and most kids end up not being able to achieve what they really want to because the entrance exams for colleges are impossible. The pressure is enormous. Like we think that there's a lot of pressure in college or in the college admissions process in the United States. Just wait till you look at these kids growing up in Korea, the tutoring, the studying, um, the amount of psychological pressure that the system puts on them. And so a lot of families will come to the United States because there are so many avenues to success in America that you don't have in Korea. It's very rigid. In most universities, you literally have to have somebody die in order to take for a position to open up. You can't create your own opportunities. It's like that in Europe and many countries as well. A lot of the opportunities that America has are not available either because of a cultural or systems issue in a bunch of different countries. So they come here. But if you're going to come here, I honestly feel like, and maybe this is because I grew up in Ohio, and I grew up in a very non-Korean society. Like my parents did hang out with their group of Korean friends, and that's all they did. But I never felt like leaning into that side would help me on any level, and I don't think it really has on any level. Now, culturally, am I more bereft because I didn't learn more Korean or, more Korean language skills? Like, I went to Korean school just like you did for a bunch of years. I did go to Korea and visited. We do have a bunch of Korean cultures and customs, which I don't think are bad. Like, I don't think, to a certain degree, respecting your elders is a bad thing. In a lot of ways, it's very important. But I don't think that sort of blinds, devotion that you're supposed to do is appropriate. So I personally have picked and chosen the things that I think are appropriate and are helpful and are also touch points for our family in terms of um, cultural things. Just like all families have rituals, they all have special things that they do, whether it's something they've made up or something that's sort of been passed down on their families. Uh, and would I have liked I could have learned Korean a lot more over the years. I never chose to because I never felt like it was an like yes, could I have spoken to my parents better? Yes. But did I really like speaking Korean? One of the biggest issues I had about learning Korean was I didn't think it was a very equitable language. So, when you speak in Korean, the way you speak to someone older than you, as you know, and then someone who's your peer or who's lower in status to you is very different. So, literally, the words, the way you phrase things, you can't argue with your parents the same way in Korean as you could in English. When we argue as a daughter, father in English, that language that we use when you speak to me, I speak to you, is the same vocabulary. It's the same sentence structure. It's the same uh, wording. But if we were to speak in Korean and you were arguing with me, you literally have a disadvantage as my daughter because you cannot use the same words, sentence structure, and phrasing. You literally have to use words that make you subservient to me because otherwise it is hugely disrespectful and it's crazy. And so when I would argue with my mother, like there's no way I was going to speak Korean to her. She would speak Korean to me, but I was no way I was going to speak English because there's that tone that I would have to use or that phrasing would never make it worthwhile to argue. Like you automatically lose, by when you're saying, "Oh, if it pleases you, mother," and she's like, "Shut up." Like there's no way it's going to be even. So there was a lot of disincentive for me as I was growing up to learn Korean. I just didn't want to learn Korean because I never felt like it put me in an advantage for any reason. I mean, when you speak to Korean, you're speaking in a different way. You're speaking to your grandmother, you're speaking to your peers, you're learning it through K-pop. That's a completely different motivation and uh, set of circumstances that I never really had. So I understand why you would want to do that, but I'm sure you could also understand why it was difficult for me and why my perspective is different in terms of what it means to me. So, what are you gonna do with your kids when they grow up? Are you gonna what Korean customs are you going to carry on? What kind of language skills are you going to encourage for them? You didn't like doing Korean language school. Would you have wanted us to continue that for you?
I mean, I like a lot of things we did when we were younger. Like you and Nick talked about it in your episode, and you and Mom did too. Where like we did Kumon, for instance, and like I guess Kumon's kind of similar to this thing in Korea called Hagwon, but it's not as intense. It's just like supplementary work for school per se, and like Nick and I also didn't like that. Like I think I cried way more about Kumon than I ever did about Korean school, and we still stuck with it. And now Nick and I think are both very thankful that we were put in it and that it honestly had a very large impact, I think, on our trajectory in school and how I viewed like STEM subjects and my capability of doing math, for instance. I mean, I think a lot of it also like it's hard to predict because a lot of it depends on like who I marry, for instance. Like, what do they want? Like, are they Korean even? Like, if they're not Korean, then do they speak a language? Like,
So you must have a lot of friends who have one Korean parent, one non-Korean parent, right?
I mean, I have probably more than your generation, but it's not necessarily like both parents speak another language. Like I see a lot of like half white, half Korean, where it's not like the tension of like, well, do we teach our kids English or Korean? Like it's a little bit different than like if you had, for instance, like I,
So what are their Korean language skills like, or how do they approach the Korean culture and as part of their life or their
I mean, it's
heritage?
very different. I've met half Korean Americans who have spoken better Korean than me. I've also met I've met full Koreans who are my generation who speak way less than me, know nothing. I mean, this is also the spectrum of it's very much what the parents make it. Not all second generation Koreans are the same. Not all third generation Korean Americans are the same. Like, I think that's like very much dependent on the parent. Like, I know a couple, like, whatever, like, like white Asians, like white Koreans who the mom is Korean, and so she, it was really important to her, so she was a lot more influential in, like, the upbringing, and that's why the kids speak literally better Korean than me. I've also met ones where, like, the dad is Korean and the mom's white, and, somehow that dynamic led it to their kids knowing nothing and not really being culturally immersed in it, like,
What would your choice be? Let's suppose whether you marry someone who's Korean or not Korean, what would you like your children to know in terms of their Korean heritage?
I mean, I think the reality of it is, like, I have a lot of other things that I wanna do in my life, and the priority of, like, me becoming fluent in Korean is not that large of a priority, and, like, so I think because of that reality, like, there is no way that my kids will ever be fluent in Korean unless I send them, you know what I mean, like, to a, like, intense, unless they live in Korea, like, go to intensive Korean boot camp, which is probably not gonna happen for me as, like, a mother, I feel like, in the future.
Would you like them to learn or become fluent in Korean? Like, would that be a plus for you?
There's just, like, it's I can't really wrap my head around it because I'm not. Like, I don't know many people where the kid is better at a language than the parent per se, and, like, I think that's just a reflection on, like, parent dynamics and whatever, and so honestly, for me, like, what's more important is, like, I don't like, I feel like just, like, understanding the culture in a sense of, like, understanding, like, why we are Korean, like, the story of, like, like, my grandparents immigrating, which would be their great-grandparents, like, how we came to America, like, I feel like for me, understanding the stories and why, like, my kids are who they are in the future and why they are, like, the 4th generation to live in America, hopefully, and things like that. I feel like that cultural comprehension and understanding and just both the acknowledgement, awareness, but also the appreciation of where they came from, I feel like that is inherently tied to my Korean heritage, and having them understand that is more important. Like, obviously, like, I will probably have my kids, like, eat Korean food. Like, like, I will obviously, like, hopefully at least, like, take them to Korea if I can, like, at one point in their lives. Like, there are things like that, I feel like, which aren't necessarily you don't need to know the language to be appreciative of your roots.
You've mentioned at school that there are different groups of Asian students, ones who sort of lean very, like maybe they were international students who have come overseas, others who, as you said, are, very sort of into whatever heritage or culture that they're in, and then others who are way less so. Um, and I feel like you've mentioned that you don't really love it on either side. So, what is it about, say, international students who come from Korea, who are in the United States? What is it that you don't love about sort of those aspects of their culture?
I mean, in my own like, I feel like, one, it's really hard to make generalizations. Like, I've met a lot of international kids who went to high school in Korea through my career finance study fellowship, and I didn't even know, or I couldn't even, like, my first impression of them was that, like, they went to high school in America, for instance, and I think that that does still speak to the spectrum of not all international students are gonna necessarily fit this stereotype. I mean, like, I will say in the majority of my interactions with Korean international students at Duke, I think there's just, like, a lot of judgment per se of, like, not being Korean enough, which I think is speaks to also other cultures. Like, I feel like there's so much media out there for people feeling like they're not, like, Indian enough or not Black enough or, like, not
Right.
Hispanic enough, and that's, I think, just, like, a common thread among all people who grew up in a country versus growing up in America.
What do you have to do to be Korean enough, do you think, in their eyes?
I mean, and so that's why I have an issue with it because I don't really know what that means. Like, does that mean that that, grandma and grandpa, does it start with them not leaving Korea? Or does it start, is it all on me and I should have done it even if I started in America? Like, that's a very complicated question, which is why I have an issue with it because I think it's very hard to make that type of blanket statement. Um, but at the same time, I do think that it is really hard it can be difficult transitioning as a Korean international student to American universities. I mean, even how people dress, like how college is structured. And so I think that I pushed back a lot more on them and were more hard on them when I was in high school and maybe at the start of Duke. But I think over the past 2 years, I have, tried to be more understanding of maybe why they act the way they do or why they do certain things because at the end of the day, like, I am who I am because of how I was raised and what generation Korean American I am, and you could say the same thing for them.
Let me put up an example of a Korean cultural tradition and ask you how to resolve this because this is actually something that's been going on in our family. Uh, and I've actually talked to it with some of my friends who are not Korean, and they have very mixed views. Like they've given me opinions about resolution of this, and it's been very different. One is, and this is the genealogy book, which we've talked about. So in the Korean tradition, your genealogy is written in this tome or textbook or whatever it is, this public book, and basically all of your ancestors, as far back as you can remember, is written in it, and it's shared, and then it's passed down from generation to generation, and it has basically your family tree listed in it. And I remember we were talking about it as a family, and my mother said that this has to be passed on to Nick. So my father's the oldest son. I'm the oldest son of our generation. And so it would come to me. But then when it came to me, after me, it would go to Nick because he is the son, not the daughter, who you are, even though you are the oldest child. So to resolve this, what would be the solution? Should it go to Nick and respect the Korean cultural tradition, or should it go to you because this is the way the tradition should actually be upheld? Is to change, because not all traditions have to be the same. Traditions change over time. Should it go just to the oldest child, regardless of gender?
I mean, obviously, as the oldest child in this situation, like, I'm biased. I think I cared a lot more when I was younger. I'm honestly kind of over it. I don't really care about getting the book anymore because at the end of the day, like, the book is gonna die with our generation. Like,
Why
or
not?
whatever. Like, it's not going to like have the same value necessarily. Like, I think like,
We could keep it the same
well,
value.
like keeping it, but I mean in
I
the
mean, it'd be
sense,
written in English.
yeah, like for instance,
But
like that. Like
but
it's
so what?
things like that where I feel like it, like at least for Nick, it won't like he won't care as much about it as like let's say like grandpa did. And like or they'll care about it in very different ways. Like for grandpa it's like this is ingrained, this is going to affect my children's names, and that's true. For Nick, our generation, it's more like, oh, this is like a cool thing from like our family, and like, we could follow, we could not follow it. That's kind of like it's more up to interpretation, I think, for what we want to do with it.
And so what would your suggestion be in terms of how should we interpret this?
I mean, obviously, like for me, in terms of like breaking tradition, like I think there are some traditions that need to be broken. I mean, you look at the world today, tradition is not necessarily forever set in stone. I mean, the tradition 50 years ago was that women were not really in investment banking, and I am now a woman going into investment banking. Now we see female CEOs. I mean, look at the CEO of Citibank, for instance. She's a woman, So it's like things like that, I think. And so obviously for me, I'm gonna be like, well, we should just break the tradition. Like I should get it. Like whatever. I mean, I'm over it in the sense that I don't feel like fighting on it, like, per se. Like, I also think that there is the tension of, well, you also want to respect your grandparents' wishes. But if we're being honest, I speak to grandma and grandpa with like not that much respect in like my tone, I feel like sometimes. And
You mean just because you don't have the language
because
capability to
it's English. Like, even when I
Yes.
speak in grandpa to English, it's not like I'm necessarily like the most respectful tone per se. Like, him and I have had
Yes, but
tips and whatever.
yes,
So,
yes, yes, yes.
like, I think that there is that too, but because of the way I was raised as a Korean American, like you said, like you and I argue a lot differently than like you and like grandma argue per se. And so I think that
I've gotten beaten a lot.
yeah, and so I think I'm okay with like breaking the tradition because like the type of culture that frames that book and why it's passed down through men is not necessarily something that has fully permeated my life in the way that it fully permeated like grandpa's life.
I don't want to call it breaking, it's a modifying because it's not like you're
Burning the book.
exactly, you're maintaining it. Maybe it's in English. So again, modifying the tradition. It's not going to be in the old Chinese characters that I think traditionally are used in there. So, but the issue is, as you said, would my parents even give me the book if they knew that I was not going to give it to Nick? They might be like, I don't know. I think there is some precedent about this.
We also have not found this book yet, by the way, for the viewers out there. It's supposedly in the house. We don't actually know where it is.
It is. Well, I mean, they're older, so they can't keep track of all that stuff, but I'm pretty sure I know where in the basement it's being hidden. But anyway, we could do one of those national treasure type,
Scavenger
yeah,
hunt.
scavenger hunts. But I'm just saying there is precedent that they could cut meat out and then give it to Rich, who's the next son in line, who of course has only sons, so he couldn't.
Who none of them speak Korean, by the way.
So none. So I think the funny thing is that you are the most Korean like forward person in your generation of the kids who are growing up, and yet you're the one who, and this is why I'm talking about it, benefits the least on many levels from being the most Korean. Like if you were the oldest son and of the oldest son, there'd be so many advantages that you would have. Like literally everyone would have to be like bowing to you, using the honorifics all the time and all that. But since you're the oldest quote daughter, like the Korean tradition, like that's why I ask, because it benefits you the least, and yet you are the most knowledgeable about the Korean culture, the Korean language, uh, you know, and you lean into it more than anyone else does. And yet, so that tension, as you said, is what amazes me sometimes. That listen, I love the fact that you are proud of for being Korean. I am very proud of the fact that you know as much Korean as you do. I'm very proud of the fact that you are really good about the Korean culture, better than anyone else that I know in my close circle. And yet it it there's tension for me because I personally like rejected it because there was so much of it that when I was growing up I didn't find helpful for me. If anything, it was more of a hindrance because then I would have to listen to my parents more. I'd have to follow what they wanted. I would have to do what they wanted to do. And most of a lot of what my life was about pushing all of that away.
I mean, it's about context. You can even look at like transnational and transracial adoptees. South Korea, I just read an article in the New York Times, had like the most like, and it also was like a totally messed up system of like adoption, and like sending.
Oh, Koreans?
Yeah, like
Yeah, well, they got rid of all
yeah,
their
it's
girl
crazy. Like
babies.
there's also a history of female infanticide and like China, for instance. Like obviously, like there's also that nuance and like it's. I feel like it's even more complicated for people, Korean adoptees and white families of like, well, are you Korean and whatever. Like
Yes, very,
like,
very
it's
complicated.
all about the context of which you live in and which you were born in, and like partially that's why like I at this point do not really care about if they give me the book or not because I know that they know that if they give the book to like my cousins or Nick, there's a much higher chance that like the appreciation and the cultural awareness of the book's roots is going to be a lot less. And I know that they know that, and I don't really, that's why like I'm like whatever, because at the end of the day, like I'm not going to like force them to give me a book. That's like not like a fight that I really care about or want to have. And I think that for me being the only girl born on like your very male dominated side of the family, I'm I've done everything that I want to do, and I've know, for instance, that like I go to a great university and that I am like, on the higher side of like smartness on that, like whatever, and things like that. Like I think that me knowing that and being secure in that, I know that they know, and I know that they've watched me grow up. I know that they've seen everything that I've done. And so for me, it's like if you want to give it to them, like that's fine. Like that's something that you would have, like that you can do and you can live and, with that conscious decision, and that's fine. Like I know that they know all this.
I will say this, I've never lived my life in accordance to what my parents wanted because if that meant anything to me, the disappointment I know they felt that I went to Duke and I didn't go to a Harvard or a Princeton or a Yale or one of the Ivies, I could tell because the minute I got into Columbia Med School, that's all my father was speaking about was like that was redemptive. Like, okay, he went to Duke, but he went to Columbia Med School. So I know how they feel. I will tell you this. I don't care what they
Oh,
think about the
yeah.
book. So I'll I'm getting the book and I'm giving it to you. Like there's no reason for me not to but with the caveat that you have to maintain the tradition as modified, you have to continue the genealogy. You have to write it in English. You have to keep track of everybody's births, their names, their
And
document.
obviously, we joke that I'm the one who's going to host all the cousin reunions in
No,
like
I
20 years.
I understand that, but that would be my mandate to you is that tradition would have to be continued. The only difference is that it doesn't and it shouldn't matter which gender it is, uh, who gets it, and maintains that.
I mean, times change, I mean, like, this is also a whole thing of as time passes, people change. Like Duke itself has also changed as a school, and its prestige, and it's now better than half the Ivies, according to a lot of rankings. And then you have like Nick, who just got in, and Grandpa calls all really excited, really happy, really proud. He calls me every time, Duke is playing in a basketball game. And did you see the game? And oh my God, they're so good. And I'm so proud that like two of my grandkids go to Duke. I mean, you know what I mean? Like at
But
times,
where did he tell you to
I
apply?
mean, at times he like told me to already at Harvard, but I don't necessarily think that that means like the disappointment he felt when you went is this, he doesn't feel. I don't think he feels any disappointment that necessarily that we didn't go.
No, absolutely not. No, I'm just talking about
Yeah, I
me,
know,
the disappointment with
but
me.
that's why times change. Like there was disappointment when you went to Duke, but then when Nick and I both got into Duke, it was like, oh my God, like,
Yes.
and so I think like times change and people change, and that's why like I don't really care what they think per se, because I've like they have to live with the facts. Like grandpa had to live with the fact that Duke became a really awesome, great school, and he learned and whatever, and like that's just something that like I'm not gonna like necessarily fight against or wait for, because I just don't care enough.
So in the future, what is it? How do you find that balance as your fourth generation kids go forth? Is there anything that you're going to be telling them about how you grew up in terms of like what to do, what not to do?
Well, yeah, I think it's very important, one, to like have a close and like transparent relationship with your kids. Like I plan on being on as transparent with them as possible about like what my relationship with their grandparents, aka you guys, are like why some things annoy me, why some things don't, like what heavy burdens or do I carry from my past, and why is it like whatever. Like I plan on being very transparent about my kids, because I think being a kid, you understand like how irritating it can be sometimes to not know things or not hear that, and so that's obviously important to me. I mean,
Have I not been
no,
transparent?
I think you have, and I
Okay.
think that's, like, why, like, I wanna follow that in the sense, whereas when I see, like, you with, like, your parents, like, obviously, like, it's very obvious that there was not as much conversation or transparency between
None.
you guys, yeah, and so,
What would you do different? Like, what would you tell them? This is what my parents did for me that I'm not going to do for you. Like, I want this to be different between us.
I mean, I think that's a lot of more, like that's not really cultural, I think that's more, like, personal
Oh,
things,
okay.
yeah, like, I mean, like, I think in terms of, like, the culture, I wouldn't necessarily do anything different, but it also, again, depends on who I marry. Like, I feel like if you didn't marry mom, I don't really know. Like, hypothetically, I wouldn't be me anymore, but I don't really know, like, if you would have sent your kids to Korean school, because that was something that, like, mom's mom was a really big perpetuator of. Like,
I
she
mean,
was the one that enrolled me in Korean school and did the
I
homework.
would have wanted you to go to Korean school regardless, but most of the cultural
That
tradition.
surprises me, actually.
Really? Why?
I feel like you would not want I feel like you didn't really care if we went to Korean school or not.
Oh no, I got benefit out of going to like listen, language acquisition of any form
It's
for
very, yeah, it helps develop a child,
right, and it's the same with music lessons, I think, sports.
which we did all of those.
Yeah, so I would have leaned into all of that. I was totally okay with you guys dropping it because you had to pick and choose your battles, and the battle to get you guys to go weekly to Korean school on Fridays or whenever it was, Friday nights, was just like, it was brutal. And like you said, the skill acquisition was not good. Not because you guys weren't smart, but because the way they were teaching
Yeah.
at these schools was not appropriate for you guys. They assumed that there was a certain level of Korean fluency in the household, which there usually was, because these were all, like you said, second generation kids whose parents had just come from Korea. So they were surrounded by Korean. But for you and Nick to come home and for us not to be speaking Korean around you guys, like this development of your language skills, like an hour a day, a week at, or 2 hours a week at language school is just not going to be enough.
Yeah, well, that's why, like, for me, like, Korean schools aren't off the table, and I would very much, but I would also want to take from my experience and make it, like, a little bit more, like, efficient, if I'm being honest. Like, whether it's, like, instead getting, like, a tutor who, like, understands, like, my kid's level, or that they're starting with nothing or whatever they're starting with, like, that's obviously not at the table, but again, it's, like, who you marry. Like, my kids might be a fourth generation Korean, but if I marry, like, a Chinese, like, the child of Chinese immigrants, they're a third generation Chinese. Like, just because if I don't marry a Korean, they are not just Korean. And I think that is something else. Like, if I married like someone from Spain, they'd be a first, you know what I mean? Like a first generation. Hispanic or whatever in America. Like, and so I think
I
that,
don't know what the right term is in.
yeah, whatever, but like I think that's like a very different. And so it's like hard for me to say because obviously like some things are non-negotiable for me in the sense like, well, we need to like, it's not like we're never gonna eat Korean food, or like I would like them to have like a first birthday, like a tour, for instance, and whatever.
Mhm,
But it's not necessarily like, oh, they're definitely gonna be fluent in Korean, or they're definitely gonna learn the language, or
mhm.
that's just something that I feel like is harder to plan. So it's just not as much of a priority for me.
I think for me, for you guys growing up, the touch the cultural touch points like first birthday, the was it
Years,
the 90-day one where
100 day, 100.
the 100-day one, sorry, 100 days. So the 100-day one is where you throw the different things out onto the mat.
No, that's the first birthday.
Oh, is that the first birthday?
100-day birthday is just like, wow, like because children used to die back then in Korea and wouldn't make it to 100 days because of like the horrible conditions of the pre-war country. So they
Right.
were like, oh my God, it lived 100 days. Like it
Yeah,
just made
infant
progress.
mortality was incredibly high for everyone back then in the day. Yeah, so at the year, like throwing the different things out, like the noodles and the money and the
Pencil.
pencil, and having the baby reach for it to sort of tell you what their future fortune is going to be. Like I'm into all that. I'm into the New Year's day celebration,
And
and
we love Korean food.
yeah, I mean, I think Korean, like, yeah, that should be another discussion at some point, like culture, Korean food. I I am, I love Korean food. I am not someone who has to eat Korean food every day. I think,
Mom and I are.
yeah, like Sue could eat Korean food every day and live a happy life. And I would be like, wait, where's my,
Which is crazy
Chipotle
to
or
me.
something? Like, I'm not that way,
Korean
but
Chipotle is bibimbap.
I feel comfortable navigating outside of Korean stuff
Yeah.
more than inside Korean stuff, but I can navigate well enough. But I am the super whitey person, and for all of my peers, pretty much, it's just the way it is. Um,
I mean, me too.
I feel like you navigate both worlds pretty well, all things considered. I
You get
think
to prove yourself. Like a lot of my Duke friends, their first impression from me is very different than how we are now.
because once they get to know how much you actually know, then they're sort of like that adds another aspect of their knowledge.
Yeah, like one of my friends always is like, I cannot believe you know that word. She's like, how do you know that word? Like, like things like that. And for me, it's just words that like they were never advanced words. It's just words that I know.
Yeah, the first time he told me about Solmek, I was like, oh yeah, that's not a word that I knew.
Yeah, somek. There's like
What's Solmek?
somek is soju and mekju, which is mekju is beer and Korean. So, I mean, there's also things like chimek, chicken and mekju, which is like a very popular combination of chicken and beer in Korea.
See, that's the thing. I had chicken and beer when I was growing up in med school. Like we would go to Fort Lee,
Yeah,
but we never called it
chimek. Yeah.
Shimek. Like you guys are the ones who are making it cool with the language. Well, Sash, I really appreciate the time that you spent. I think this is a very interesting topic just because there's no right answer for any of it. Um, and my perspective has been so colored by the way I grew up, probably in a bunch of negative ways, which actually slants me sort of anti-Korean in a lot of ways. But your perspective has been very, positive, and you've been able to sort of navigate it in a better way.
Which is a testament, I think, to you and mom.
I mean, I think mom is definitely way more Korean, like
Mom has
obvious,
been, yeah, very influential, I
and
think.
and I think without her influence, you would never have gotten half sort of the positive influence about Korean culture
And it's her and her mom.
and her mother. Uh, and but I've always been the one who sort of, and her too, grounded in like, listen, we're
We
Americans.
live in America.
We live in America. Success is built on being an American, not like living in some sort of like
Hmm.
idealized like bubble where you have to,
Yeah.
and there's so many immigrant communities just like that, whether you go to Newark, with the Portuguese or Brazilian community, or in a Polish community or a Korean or Chinese community. Like there's way more that we have to do in terms of being successful than just sort of
It,
leaning into that.
it's like code switching. Like, I know we're wrapping up with this totally other topic, but it's like code switching. Like, how I.
What's code switching?
Code switching is like, some people see it as a negative concept. A lot of immigrants and people of color see it as just like a way it's supposed to be. Like, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but it basically is like when you switch how you speak and how you act
Ah.
based on the environment and who you're with.
Mm.
And obviously, like, I think that's why, for instance, like, the Korea Finance Society has been really helpful because obviously, like, being in, like, the workplace, which is predominantly, like, white, for instance,
Mm.
whereas, like, being, like, with my Korean friends, I do, like, I'm speaking very differently, like, with the words I'm throwing
All right,
around.
well, sure.
Yeah, and so that's just, like, something that people like, "Oh, like, you're speaking so, like, white now," or whatever, like,
Mm.
that's kind of an example of code switching, and I think that's also something that is another part of this.
I think to me, it's more about being empathic. So
Yeah.
when I'm working with someone or I'm interacting with someone, it really doesn't matter who I am or where I've come from. I really want to feel or understand where that person's coming from. So someone looking at that might call it code switching if what I'm doing, but what I'm really trying to do is just develop a connection and a bond to that person. And if that person happens to be someone who is super Italian or super Irish. Like, I know enough about these cultures and I
Yeah.
try to learn enough that I can sort of connect on some level. Like, so I know what their background was like, how they might have grown up, like what might have been important to them or their family growing up. And
Yeah.
and so I'm not like trying to be them, but I'm trying to connect with them.
That's why people like me, for instance, like immigrants, people of color, don't see it as a bad thing. They see it as, like, wanting to even mean, like, building that connection. Because, like I said, like, I have non-Korean friends, and, like, my relationships with them are just as strong because we bond, we connected over something different. Whereas, like, some of my Korean friends, just as strong of a relationship too, but that's probably, like, some of the basis is, like, the cultural understanding. And, like, that's just, like you said, like, being, like, valuing where people are from and their backgrounds, and that's why some people say that, like, code switching is not a bad thing.
I mean, it's funny because my best friends, if you had to ask me, would be the guys that I trained with in residency. One is Italian, Italian American, one's Indian, and one's Indian American, and one's Chinese American. And all of us have our own cultural backgrounds. All of us have explored our own cultural heritages, gone back, visited our own different countries. We all have our own depths. Like all of them have a lot of depth to their character and their nature. I've seen them talk about, post, discuss their ancestry and where they're from. But when we get together, none of that is in play. It's what our shared experiences
What
were.
connects you?
Yeah, our trial by fire, like how we survived, what shaped our outlook. And so the depth that we have for our cultural heritage does inform us and make us more resilient in a lot of ways. But when we meet and connect with others, that's not necessarily something that people have to bring to the forefront because that's not what's necessarily going to connect you with somebody else. And so, I mean, maybe I've done that to an extreme, some might say, but on the other hand, I have felt like learning more about others and not necessarily putting my own self out in front has helped me more than hurt me, I
That's
guess.
why I think everyone listening, whether you're, like, a parent or a child or, like, a potential future parent, like, I think it's very important to be transparent and let your kids know about, like, what has shaped you to be the way you are today, whether it's cultural and or, like, environmental, social, political, whatever. Like, I think that's why I place value on, like, the generation, like, I don't neglect. I'm, like, proud that I'm third generation Korean American, and I think that's because I have a lot of appreciation, and I'm very grateful for what you and mom both endured and also experienced. But I think if I didn't know that, like, my relationship with being, like, Korean American would be very, very different.
Agreed. Sasha, thank you so much. That was an awesome conversation. I appreciate it. And good luck this summer in Chicago.
Thank
I'm going to
you.
try to visit you as many times as I can.
Yay.
Thank you.